We are anonymous. We do not serve kings. We do not worship false idols. And we do not look away when power turns justice into a joke. What you are about to hear is not satire. It's not a comedy sketch. It's a true story from inside Donald Trump's Department of Justice, one that reveals how absurd, corrupt, and dangerously self-serving the system became. It's the story of a man, a sandwich, and a federal government that tried to destroy him for daring to challenge authority. His name is Sean Dunn. Once a paralegal working inside the DOJ, he became the accidental face of resistance after throwing a salami Subway sandwich. Yes, with onions and mustard at a Customs and Border Patrol officer. What should have been a laughable misunderstanding turned into a full-blown federal case. Under Trump's Justice Department, led by Pam Bondi, the message was clear: dissent would not be tolerated, not even if it came wrapped in wax paper. The government tried to label Dunn a violent criminal. They wanted to charge him with felony assault on a federal officer, the same kind of charge used for serious attacks. The idea that a man tossing a sandwich could face years in prison sounds insane, because it is. But this is what the Trump-Bondi DOJ had become, an institution that had lost sight of justice and turned into a weapon against its own citizens. The case went to trial in Washington, D.C., and in just under 3 hours, the jury delivered its verdict: not guilty. They even ate sandwiches during deliberation. You couldn't script irony that sharp. But that verdict wasn't just about one man's innocence. It was a verdict against a government obsessed with control and image. Inside the courtroom, the defense lawyer Julia Gatto gave what might go down as one of the most iconic closing arguments in recent history. She looked directly at the jury and said, "He did it. He threw the sandwich. And now the federal government wants to make a felony case out of it." That was it. No theatrics, no excuses, just truth. It stripped the government's case of all pretense. What kind of a justice system spends taxpayer money prosecuting mustard stains? Meanwhile, the assistant U.S. attorney, leading the prosecution, stood frozen, forced to defend the indefensible. Their argument was weak, robotic, and disconnected from reality. They begged the jury to put aside your feelings about Donald Trump and convict Dunn. But the jury wasn't buying it. They had eyes. They had common sense. They saw through the charade. The so-called victim, a Border Patrol officer named Greg Larimore, testified dramatically that the sandwich exploded all over his chest, that he reeked of onions and mustard, and that this amounted to a serious assault. But during cross-examination, the defense produced a photograph showing the sandwich lying perfectly intact on the ground, still wrapped, untouched, unbroken. That image said more than any lawyer could. Anyone who's ever eaten at Subway knows their wrapping is tight. Unless that sandwich unrolled itself mid-air like a movie stunt, it couldn't have caused the explosion Larimore described. The jury knew he was lying, and in that moment, they weren't just judging Sean Dunn. They were judging the credibility of the system itself, because this wasn't an isolated lie. It was part of a pattern, a culture of deception fostered under Trump's administration. The same week as Dunn's trial, Judge Ellis in Chicago caught another Border Patrol official, Greg Bovino, lying under oath about being attacked with a rock. Bovino claimed it was retaliation for firing tear gas at protesters, but the evidence proved it never happened. That's perjury, a federal crime. And when DOJ attorneys allow false testimony to go uncorrected, that's suborning perjury, a betrayal of the very idea of justice. Think about that. A man faced trial for throwing a sandwich, while federal officers lied under oath and walked free. That's not justice, it's theater. And it's why the Dunn case became a symbol of how broken Trump's DOJ had become. Grand juries across D.C. had already rejected multiple attempts by Bondi's department to criminalize peaceful protests and minor offenses. They were done playing along with political persecution. But the DOJ didn't care. They kept pushing. They refused to accept no. They bypassed grand juries, downgraded cases to misdemeanors, and used taxpayer money to harass citizens. They wanted to make an example of anyone who questioned authority, and Sean Dunn was their latest target. After the acquittal, Dunn stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by his lawyers and supporters. His voice was steady but emotional, as he said, "I believed that night I was protecting the rights of immigrants. The Great Seal of the United States says e pluribus unum, from many one. Every life matters. No matter where you came from, no matter how you got here, you have the right to live free." Those words hit deep. They reminded people of something. The government had forgotten what America is supposed to stand for. Pam Bondi Trump's hand-picked enforcer at the DOJ didn't see it that way. Reports revealed she personally pushed for Dunn's firing after the incident, calling him a liability. That's who she is, thin-skinned, vindictive, and more concerned with loyalty than law. Instead of upholding justice, she turned the DOJ into a stage for political revenge. And yet her department lost again and again. In the same week as Dunn's acquittal, federal judges delivered a series of stunning rulings against Trump's administration. Judge Immergut in Oregon blocked Trump's attempt to use the National Guard to crush protests in Portland. Judge McConnell in Rhode Island ordered the government to restore $8 billion in SNAP food aid that had been illegally withheld from blue states. Judge Curry in D.C. demanded that the DOJ hand over grand jury transcripts related to investigations into James Comey and Letitia James, exposing how Trump's team prosecuted before even investigating. And the Supreme Court, including Trump's own appointees, showed open skepticism toward his reckless tariff plans. Each of these rulings, one after another, dismantled the myth of Trump's law and order. The Dunn trial became the punchline, but the larger truth was deadly serious. The justice system had been corrupted from within. Behind the headlines, there were federal officers lying under oath, judges losing patience with political prosecutors, and citizens losing faith in institutions meant to protect them. The DOJ wasn't defending the law anymore. It was defending power, and that power was cracking. When a jury laughs at the government's case, eats sandwiches while deliberating, and delivers an acquittal in record time, it's not just a loss. It's humiliation. It's the public saying, "We see through you." Trump's administration had spent years trying to rewrite reality. They turned facts into opinions, truth into fake news, and justice into a joke. But the system they corrupted was finally rejecting them from the bench, from the jury box, and from the voting booth. Because even as the DOJ stumbled, America was shifting. In state after state, voters were rejecting MAGA extremism. Virginia flipped blue. Mississippi elected Democratic delegates. Pennsylvania's courts stayed blue. New Jersey elected its first female moderate Democratic governor. Gavin Newsom secured overwhelming support in California. Everywhere Trump had once claimed victory, he was losing ground. And yet his inner circle refused to read the writing on the wall. They were too arrogant, too addicted to the illusion of control. Inside the DOJ, prosecutors whispered about morale collapsing. Career attorneys were leaving in droves. Judges complained of sloppy, politically motivated filings. Grand juries were refusing to indict. It wasn't just the Dunn case. It was a systemic collapse. The salami sandwich became a symbol of everything wrong with the era. It showed how far the government would go to flex its power, and how easily that power could crumble when confronted by truth. Even the jurors munching on their sandwiches became part of the rebellion. Their verdict wasn't just about Sean Dunn. It was about saying enough with the lies, enough with the fear, enough with turning ordinary citizens into enemies of the state. And that's what terrifies people like Trump and Bondi. Not a sandwich, not a court case, but the idea that people are waking up. That's why the DOJ fought so hard to make an example out of Dunn. Because if a man can stand up, throw a symbolic protest, and win it, exposes their weakness. It shows that the people they tried to silence still have power. The irony is poetic. Trump's team wanted a felony conviction to send a message. Instead, they sent a meme, a viral image of Dunn, silhouetted like a Banksy figure immortalized on DC walls as the man who threw back at tyranny. And now the story spreads online, retold across the country, amplified by those who refuse to forget how absurd things became. But make no mistake, this was never just about humor. It's about accountability. When the Justice Department lies, when officers perjure themselves, when the powerful turn law into a weapon, the result isn't order. It's chaos disguised as authority. The Dunn trial peeled back that disguise. It showed a government that had become its own parody. It showed citizens that truth still has power. And it reminded everyone watching that justice belongs to the people, not the politicians. Tonight, as we look back on that week, remember what it meant. A $6 sandwich did what Congress couldn't: expose corruption, humiliate abusers of power, and remind Americans that the system only works if ordinary people stand up and say no. Trump's DOJ thought they were teaching a lesson. They were, but not the one they intended. They taught us that courage doesn't come from the powerful. It comes from those willing to act even in small ways, even when the odds are ridiculous. So here's the truth. The Department of Justice, under Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, didn't just lose a case. They lost the moral authority to call themselves defenders of justice. And history will remember that not through grand speeches or laws, but through one absurd moment in a courtroom where a jury chose common sense over corruption. A wrapped sandwich became a symbol of unwrapped truth. We are anonymous. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And we do not look away when justice is mocked. If you believe truth still matters, if you believe justice still belongs to the people, share this story. Let the world know that no amount of power can silence common sense forever. Because sometimes the revolution begins not with a weapon, but with a sandwich.